Morning. So let's call the meeting to order, and Sam, if you'll read the statement.
Okay, statement of announcement. A news release announcing the date, time, and place of the September 21st, 2017 Policy Committee meeting was mailed September the 19th, 2017 to appropriate media and other groups or individuals who have requested notification. The announcement and agenda were posted at the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs Central Administrative Office, video conference locations, and on the website. Americans with Disabilities Act. The public has been notified that accommodations such as interpreters, mobility assistance, or other assistance will be provided to individuals with disabilities and special needs if requested in advance.
Thank you. Okay, our first agenda item is the executive limitation policy. So let's go ahead and start with that one. This policy, if I'll just go down through here for Sam and Katie to see if there are any other.
And if y'all can see that, I mean, I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Part of it is the bumpy road. So, let me, maybe if I take you off, see if I can hear a little bit better.
And Katie, if it's not too difficult for you driving logistics, it might be easier if when you're not talking, it's on mute on your end, because we're getting a lot of background noise too.
You're hearing the road too?
Apparently.
Because otherwise it's just me in the car. Okay, I'll put you on mute.
I can get closer to the phone.
Yeah, you want
Okay, is that better, Katie? Just nod your head. Will.
Yes. Yes, is that better on your end when you're muted?
Yes.
I can't tell. Okay, so number one in this policy is to, this is the Needs Executive Limitations Policy. And it says the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs is selected and appointed by the Commission, the State Director is, and serves at its pleasure. The Director is responsible for Department operations subject to Commission policies and actions applied through Department directives. The State Director shall, number one, maintain ethics and prudence in the administration of DDSN and to confirm DDSN to all federal, state, Commission requirements and to protect DDSN assets. Any recommended changes to that?
Not for me.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Number two, prescribe DDSN organizational structure, adequate qualified personnel, and effective programs necessary to carry out the legislative mandate and Commission policies of DDSN. Any changes to that?
No.
Number three, use resources effectively and efficiently and maintain transparency and accountability with the Commission through reports on services, finances, and other monitoring data necessary to the Commission's policy governance. Now, number A says is authorized to approve any contracts or purchases below $200,000 per fiscal year, and B, bring any contracts or purchases over $200,000 per fiscal year to the Commission for approval. So I think this has been discussed like 3 times in prior policy committee meetings, but we're going to discuss it again to make sure we are all in agreement on what the limitations are. So the LAC recommendation was the South Carolina Department of Disability and Special Needs should formalize its practice of seeking Commission approval for procurements exceeding $100,000 into a written policy. The South Carolina Department of Disability and Special Needs should require Commission approval for procurements when the full contractual amount exceeds $100,000. So let me ask a question. When the LAC did this audit, are they referring to $100,000 because that was the spending authority at that time?
Yes, at that time, and the kind of, I guess it wasn't in writing, which is what they were suggesting. The instructions that was given to the State Director at the time was the $100,000 mark, but that wasn't in writing anywhere. So in conversations with the LAC, they said, okay, if that's the instructions that the State Director has been given at the time of the $100,000, you need to put that in the executive limitations policy. When the Commission then engaged in that activity, said, okay, with the scope and breadth of the budget, we don't think it needs to be 100,000. We think it needs, at that time, it was 250. So when they articulated it in the policy, they put 250. And then back, I believe it was October of last year, when y'all revisited it, then it got adjusted to 200. So that's kind of how that happened.
Okay. So does anybody on the committee think that it should be lowered to 100? Or is everybody good with 200? Since when they made that recommendation, I think they were going by what it was at the time they made the recommendation.
Okay.
Right, and that was before my time, and I don't remember the date, but, times have changed, things have gotten more expensive, and so I was on the committee when we went to 250, and then brought it back down to 200, and we had a good discussion then about, you want a balance between maintaining oversight, but not hamstringing the administration in such a way that they have to basically come to the commission for, I don't want to make it sound trite, but every little thing. Yeah, you want to give them some flexibility, some ability to make decisions and move. And so I think the thinking at the time we went to 200 was that was a good compromise amount.
Right.
So, and I'm still good with the number.
Okay.
The question I have, I don't want to get away from your topic, but the LAC was talking not about per fiscal year, but total contract, right? And I think by putting it in writing, the commission sort of dealt with part of the LAC's recommendations, but not all of it. So I'd see that as the part we need to discuss.
Okay. Let's get a consensus on the 200, and then we'll come back to that. Okay. Katie, are you good with the 200?
I'm getting bits and pieces of the conversation that's going on. I'm new to the policy committee, and I'm just trying to refresh my recollection. I'm hearing bits and pieces from why you're debating whether they're 100,000 versus 200,000, correct?
Correct.
And the logic of why it went into 200,000 is where it was kind of breaking up. What I gathered is in the policy committee in the past to discuss the issue, and it allows flexibility for staff. Is that what I was hearing?
Yes.
And to be quite honest, I didn't realize that this was going to be an issue during the meeting, that specific amount. But I'm personally comfortable with it if it's already been debated and discussed.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're on record as having discussed an important LAC recommendation, and that we have a reason when the legislature sends people in to do these this kind of oversight and this kind of scrutiny. We need to have a reason for not doing it. So I think the reason.
I can't hear what other people's opinions are on that.
Well, Sam was just saying.
In favor?
I'm sorry, what? What was the question?
I couldn't hear everybody else's opinion as to whether they thought it should be 100 or 200.
Okay, Sam was saying that the last policy committee meeting, which he sat on, debated the whole thing. He said he was on it when it went to 250, and he was on it when it went back down to 200, and they felt like they had struck a fair compromise.
Okay.
And at the time the LAC made this recommendation, it was 100,000. So we're thinking that is why they put the $100,000 on there. But there's no way of knowing that for sure. But in other words, they made this recommendation based on the existing spending authority.
Gotcha. That's what was happening at the time. So they're consistent with what the policy was.
Yes, at that time.
At the existing time.
The practice.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
So Sam was saying he's comfortable with the 200. I don't have a problem with the 200. Do you have a problem with the 200?
I don't.
Okay. Okay, so we just need to know why we, why we didn't do that if we don't do what their recommended action was. And we're gonna have to go by what their action was at the time. So the other thing about it has been, and Katie, I hope you can drive and do this at the same time, please don't wreck.
You're unmuted, so if I'm distracting, I will.
No, you're fine. The road noise is not that great, so just don't try to mute back and forth because it's too dangerous.
Okay.
And it's really a non-issue anyway. So the conversation at the last policy committee meeting was about we don't want to interfere with client choice, or we can't interfere with client choice. And so subsequently, we've had numerous conversations where we know that the way the ban rates are set up now and the way the funding mechanism is set up now, that the money is actually assigned to the address and not the individual. So what we want to do here is, you had suggested this back then, that it's easy to separate those two out and just be a little bit more specific. So the wording on this, I'm going to suggest this for number A, that the state director shall bring any contracts for procurement to the commission for approval when the full contractual amount exceeds $200,000, excluding contract adjustments due to filling vacancies based on consumer choice. Contracts with providers to increase capacity that exceed $200,000 will need to be approved by the commission. Now then, that would put us in compliance with the full contract amount the LAC had suggested, and that would put us not interfering with consumer choice in the financial system that we currently have.
Okay, and I appreciate you drafting that, and I recall these issues, and agree that it needed some clarification as to when they bring it. I definitely assume in the written bill.
She is.
Would like to hear her opinion as to whether this is still ambiguous or she feels like this has clarified it enough. Because sometimes I personally get a little confused about the ban. I mean, my understanding was that money follows the person, but when you're building facilities and building the beds, and there's no person for those beds yet, I guess it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And so I want to make sure that everything is very clear as to when we are interfering with a consumer making a decision and when it's just new development that becomes a new decision for the consumer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's let Beverly respond to that one.
I think that is.
And I think that's been a big issue. Is like, where is the line of when is it just building and growth, and when does it become the consumers are involved and it's their choice, and we have to make sure we adhere to the final.
Okay, so my short answer is that goes a long way in clearing it up. If that's the path that the committee and commission chooses, I would recommend a clarification that you add a word like increase in contract amount, because at least my interpretation on hearing it for the first time was that's at 200, so that could lead the reader to think that that was the total contract amount, versus what I think you guys are getting at is if a provider's contract increases by 200,000 or more, you want me to, so it's not, you guys would approve on an annual basis the provider contracts like you did back in June or July, I forget. But if a provider grows basically by 200 or more, you want it brought back to the commission. Did I just describe that correctly?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think like last year when Babcock Center's contract increased by 10 million, or when there were other contract amounts that were on there collectively, therapy is going to be multi-million-dollar contract. And other contracts that don't have anything to do with consumers or consumer choice that were beyond the spending authority, that we need to have this spelled out more clearly. So let's take it one sentence at a time. First sentence, bring any contracts for procurement to the commission for approval when the full contractual amount exceeds $200,000, excluding contract adjustments due to filling vacancies based on consumer choice. That means if there's a vacancy and they're filling it, then they can fill that because they're being paid, the providers are being paid based on those vacancies anyway, based on that number of people. So they, if they've been vacant for a certain number of days, that contract drops off. But on the other hand, if they have an opportunity to take somebody, they pick up with that same amount. That would not have to come to us. We've already approved them for how many they have and how many vacancies they have. So that would not interfere with consumer choice. Are you good with that, Katie?
You, again, it was a little bit choppy, but I think that basically what you said, that if the beds are already existing, the consumer is $200,000 worth of money that follows the consumer happens to go to one particular provider, and the beds are already existing, then no, you do not have to bring that to us. But if it goes above and beyond, and they're building new beds where nobody's choosing them at that time, then we need to hear about that.
Right. That's right.
And the examples that have been talked about here, which is where the big dollars are. So it's a good that this is the example being talked. And I'm gonna try and talk loud so you can hear me. It is residential because that's where the big dollar amounts are, and in that sense, the brief description that Commissioner Thompson gave, as far as it's not purely assigned to the person, it is pretty strongly connected to the address where it is. Where some of our other services, and so if we're talking about a blanket statement, some of our other services like day programs, it is much more cleanly attached to the person. At the same time, the dollar amounts it's going to take 15, 20 people switching to that provider before you hit that 200,000 threshold. So operationally, it's not nearly as complicated as what with time for the residential. And if we're not in a world of residential expansion, then it even becomes less of an issue. But if we're in a world of residential expansion, that's when things are going to be moving more quickly and kind of bringing it to the commission. But I do think that the hybrid of if this but not for consumer choice, I think addresses some of the operational concerns that we have.
Okay. So the second.
Okay, and
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I'm clear too, because sometimes I feel like things are crystal clear and then all of a sudden it gets a little muddy. So basically, if there's a huge lump sum, say X amount, $1 million, say there's $1 million that is approved for one provider. If there's a movement within that $1 million that we've already approved, are you saying that each time they use $200,000 of that $1 million, we need to know about it?
No.
Or is it just the increase?
No.
If
they're contracted for $1 million, then that includes the bids that are funded that may or may not be vacant at that time.
Okay.
If we are talking about expansion bids and they're creating a new wing or they're building a new house, then that is something that needs to come before the commission. And that way we will know how many providers we're growing and what providers we're growing.
Yeah, functionally, anytime a provider wants to expand a home, it's going to come in front of the commission. That's basically functionally what this means.
Yeah.
Okay. And Beverly, are there any issues that you have in this in terms of just everyone performing their jobs adequately and effectively? Like I feel like there was something about the time of having to get to the commission to have a vote might have been an issue or something at one point.
Well, like I said, during times of expansion, but I think the concept of the language that was just read addresses the just basic movement within the structure. That was one of my main concerns when we talked about it previously. I do feel like I'm obligated to issue a note of caution in that there could be some interesting ripple effects from the commission getting into the dynamics of approving this provider to expand a home, not approving that provider to expand a home, if those providers have met the minimum standards necessary to be operating. So if you guys go down this, it may not end up being an issue, but you need to make sure from a legal perspective that if the commission decides to deny, that there's strong ground to stand on with regards to that.
Okay. All right. I see that reservation, but I also see the flip side that the checks and balances that the commission doesn't want something the provider who is not performing well to continue expanding and not knowing it too.
Right.
Right, right.
So I am getting very close to Columbia. I might be walking into things. But, okay. I probably said enough.
No, you're good, and you're the one who suggested the method of clarifying this and teasing it out, but I think it was in the hallway after the last policy committee meeting, and you said, this is an easy fix. I don't know why we're worried about this so much, you know? And so I just basically thought, I just had an aha moment, and I thought, well, dang, she's right. I mean, you know, so I think we've clarified it. And the last sentence is, contracts with providers to increase capacity that exceed $200,000 need to be approved by the commission. So if we're all in agreement with that by general consensus, we'll move on.
Did that second sentence, you were talking about the word increasing?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's clear to the reader, whomever the reader may be, that, you know, with the $1 million example, we're not talking about movement within the million, but if that single provider, ABC Residential Services, increases to 1,235,000, that at that it comes back to it's the 200 is the expansion amount. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to the reader.
It's not. It's just dealing with. It's not dealing with vacancies. It's just dealing with expansion. So we should.
I'm good if everybody thinks that's what it says.
You good, Katie?
I am.
Okay. Okay, the next one I wanted to add as B is to follow through with capital improvement expenditures within the fiscal year as approved by the commission. An explanation will be provided to the commission on capital improvement expenditures approved by the commission but not spent within the fiscal year, the year following the year of approval. All capital improvement accounts retaining balances not expended will be closed out within the 5-year time frame, materials management time frame. New capital improvement accounts may not be created without the approval of the commission. Money may not be transferred from one capital improvement account to the other without commission approval. The reason for this is that we've had a problem in the capital improvement account, and that is that some projects have been open way beyond the 5-year period. And we're growing money in that account, but I'd like for us to have some accountability in that money and not just be able to shuffle it around on projects that we haven't approved. So with that in mind, that is why I'm suggesting that we tighten up a little bit on the capital improvement account.
I'm perfectly good with that concept, because what we've been doing over the last year or so is literally requiring that as we found out about it on a case-by-case sort of thing, which then I think requires staff to have to go take care of a report that they wouldn't normally have had to run. And so by putting it in the directive, it simply becomes an expectation. So
Right.
I think that just sort of operationalizes what the commission's been having to ask for. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
Katie?
I've heard basically what Sam said, but I'm in agreement as well. I mean, it's almost like you're adding a little statute of limitations to get something done, which is always good. Sometimes when you don't have your time frame, it's easy to let it sit. I think it's good to draw some lines where things need to be accomplished.
Okay. Deborah?
Conceptually, what's being asked, I think it's completely reasonable. I do have some concerns with the timeline due to the state processes and procedures. When the commission approves something, that is the first step. We very often, and I may want Tom to come in here if you guys have some real specific questions, but we very often have, well, not very often, most of the time, have multiple steps that we then have to jump through before we can ever issue the contract or spend the first dollar. For example, it's either got to be approved at JBRC at the staff level, or it's got to go in front of JBRC. Historically, they only meet quarterly. They require like a month ahead of time. So if you backwards engineer on that map, particularly if it's a multi-stage project where the first stage has to go in front of them and then the second stage, or you've got to scope it out and design it, and given the dollar amount, they've got to go back and improve it again. The 1 year is not a realistic timeline, because very often from when you guys approve it conceptually to when we have the necessary permissions required by state government to then actually sign a contract with a bidder, and in most cases that bid would have to come back in front of you guys again for approval for that specific bid and that specific amount. If it's over the 200,000, by the time you guys approve a concept or a project in concept to when we are, in order not to violate state rules, able to actually enter into a contract is very often 6 to 9 months. And then if that contractor, so the 1 year time frame gives me a lot of heartburn from an operational perspective.
Okay, we're not saying that you have to have it completed. We're saying that you'll come back, offer an explanation. The other reason for this is because we rotate on and off, like, I would say people.
It's 4 year terms now. That doesn't mean that that's how long somebody's on it. But.
No, not that often at all. You have 7 people who've been on there 4 years. So there needs to be, this is what we did. See, there's got to be a connection between this is what the commission approved in capital improvement and what actually happens in reality. And there's a huge disconnect, because we usually approve over $3 million, and usually $1 million to $1.5 million actually gets spent in capital improvement. So we need to know, and what this says is an explanation will be provided to the commission on capital improvement expenditures approved by the commission but not spent within the fiscal year that it was approved on the following the year of approval. And if you intend to change it from one project to another project, there's no point in us sitting there voting every year on capital improvements if none of that is the way it actually happens. And there's not a big correlation between what we approve and what's actually happening.
Hey, my concern is not the report. When you talk about the rollover,
yeah.
Part of it is, it's always a pretty steep learning curve for most commissioners to understand, quite frankly, the burden of state government and all the various hoops that we have to jump through. My concern is in that language over time, when you roll over, it's creating, quite frankly, an unrealistic expectation on new commissioners that things are going to, from approval to start spending money in a time frame that is not realistic in state government.
Well,
so that's what concerns me.
As slow and as we are, I think we could probably hang on to an explanation.
Yeah, I don't need problems with reporting. No.
Of why this wasn't done from year to year. So
I would offer one more point.
Okay.
Kind of going back to the example in the previous conversation of threshold, the blanket statement of money never moved between accounts is going to tie the hands of staff and tie the hands of staff downtown at the Department of Administration. What I would recommend is that there be some threshold established, like up to a certain amount, because you don't want to leave money on the table, and it's a common practice to move particularly small amounts around. This project is done and we have $5,000 left in it, let's move it over to here. That is a very common practice within and also at the Department of Administration and at their staff level. So I understand and don't have any problem with that, keeping you guys know when money is moved around as the governing body, but maybe consider some threshold so that it doesn't, hamper some of those basic operations.
Could we could either call that a percent of the project, or we could assign it to be less than, I don't know about saying less than the $200,000 spending authority, because that could get.
No, I was assuming it would be a lower amount.
Yeah. What is usually like 90% that is spent of a project? I don't want to take the whole project out and put it on something else without it going through the future.
Yeah, I think just kind of going by that 10% of the project amount is very reasonable, and I don't think that would tie the hands of either us or the staff downtown at the Department of Administration. I think that's reasonable.
Katie, would you, and Sam, would you, it's harder to get to. Would you say that no more than 10% of a project may be transferred from one capital improvement account to the other without commission approval? Would you go with that?
That sounds reasonable to me. Beverly, do you feel like that's workable for staff?
Yes.
Okay. And have you finished addressing this? I don't hate to keep on, get back on a topic I feel like y'all were already talking about. The whole 1 year, I know you sound like that's too constricting because of all of the hoops you have to jump through and all the red tape, I guess, of government. Is there a time period that would feel a little less restrictive, or are you okay with it, that basically Vicki should ask them for a report of what's going on?
Again, I have no problem with a report. I mean, a yearly report, I mean, whatever that case may be. I just, in my tenure in this job, I know that that is something that is a very common for new commissioners coming in, that just the amount of approval processes and red tape, quite frankly, that we have to go through in state government to do that. There's just that for me, when I heard it read, it makes it sound like the expectation is that the money be spent in a year, and that's truly not a realistic expectation. You know, we can give a yearly report on everything. That's not my concern. It's the expectation that money be spent, because fast forward, you're going to have some entity like the LAC come in here and read the language in this report and have that in this policy and look at it and go, oh, well, the expectation is this, and then write a recommendation against the agency because we weren't doing this recommendation when we don't have control over it. That's my concern.
And they should, because you have control over. Every year we go and we approve capital improvement. That would be a good time to say, this is what was approved last year, and this is what we actually did, and this is why, and this year we want to do that, you know, and that's just an explanation of why things don't happen the way we perceive that they're going to happen. Sam. Oh, Katie, go ahead.
Sorry. And maybe it's the 12 months, maybe if you're saying 12 months for everything is not going to be reasonable to see very much progress. Could you just try out the 12 months and then possibly revisit the issue and redraft it to reflect like 18 or 24? If you feel like it's just we're hearing the same thing, they're basically, they're basically making the same progress in 12 months and it's not very much, maybe revisit the issue to a time where we could see more potential progress.
And again, my concern is not giving you an annual report. I have no problems with that whatsoever. And that annual report obviously can include, okay, this is what you guys approved in 17, and this is what we were able to spend in 18. But just the language that, when money hasn't been spent, when realistically it takes us 9 to 12 months to even start spending the first penny.
Okay.
So that would be my concern about writing it in right now, is that once we do that, it becomes policy. And we could fiddle with it down the road, but in the meantime, you're constrained to follow that policy.
To offer an explanation, that would be her constraint.
Okay, well, is that what it actually says at this point?
It does. It says, an explanation will be provided to the commission on capital improvement expenditures approved by the commission but not spent within the fiscal year on the following year of the approval.
Okay.
So.
Fine with me.
Okay. Katie?
That's fine with me. On the other side, just do we not just get an explanation as to where everything stands in general, or we are? That's fine with me as long as it sounds relative. It sounds clear to me. I'm not looking at it because I'm driving to refresh my memory, but if that happens, it's just asking for a progress report or some type of what's going on.
Basically, that's it, because we never had that until I asked for the Spears report last fall. And because I wanted to find out after we approve these projects, what happens to them. And that's where I found out that one project had been sitting there since 1992. So that doesn't even meet the material management requirement, because they're supposed to be filling out an A1 form and doing something with that project. They're not supposed to be sitting on it since 1992. So we just need to tighten up a little bit, and an explanation is not, too much. Okay. Last one, C, present to the commission changes to the organizational chart that result in additional positions exceeding $200,000 prior to implementation. And by that I mean, when we do things like create waiver services division, for example, and that's like 13 positions, and those have been within the last, what, 6 months?
Yeah.
So, I think we ought to look at that. Organizational changes, chart changes. When we create a division, the commission needs to look at that, if that change results in over the spending authority amount. Katie?
Y'all are breaking up a little bit, but then I actually am parking. Can I park in and walk on in?
Yeah, we'll hang up.
Okay, I'll see you in just a second.
All right.
Okay.
Do you want to wait until she gets here, or do you want to say what you think?
Well, I can go ahead and give you my comments. She won't hear them, obviously, but
We'll repeat them.
that sounds reasonable to me. That, you know, whenever some change takes place, it would seem like, or is proposed, it would seem like the commission needs to at least know about it, whether it's necessary to weigh in with a vote, or, you know, I wouldn't want to, again, hamstring the department, but
Well,
we should be informed.
that's what I'm saying. Present those changes. Present to the commission changes to the organizational chart that result in additional positions exceeding $200,000 prior to implementation, so that if there is an objection, but it's not saying the commission has to approve, but the commission should have the right to object. Now we got to wait on Caitlin.
Well, and I mean, can you add, because just again, to make sure that the instructions to me are clear, that it's an aggregate addition over the spending, because it's very common within the organizational structure, like we've been downsizing IT, internal IT. So an IT position becomes vacant because somebody leaves, and I go, okay, well, I'm going to take that IT position and I'm going to reclassify and I'm going to move it over to program because we need more in oversight, and the net is zero or minimal, $10,000 difference between that. So that you're not talking about moving things around internally, you're talking about net additions. Make sure that I understand.
Look at that, Katie.
I didn't print mine out, so thank you.
Yeah, and it says additional positions exceeding 200. I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page that y'all are.
Okay, present to the commission changes to the organizational chart that result in additional positions exceeding $200,000 prior to implementation.
And it says additional, so I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page you are. I mean, because I think it says additional positions, so the scenario that I gave.
Rerouting somebody
Okay.
is not.
All right, so you're talking about net increases.
No.
Okay.
So you missed Sam, who said he did not have a problem with that.
I'm sorry, and y'all were very sketchy in the car.
You did a great job
Bits and
driving and
pieces.
concentrating on this. So,
You're waiting on me?
Yeah, we're talking
Okay.
about C.
And I missed the conversations on whatever the,
well, I was just
Discussion
saying,
on
if you, like recently, Medicaid services, waiver services division was created, and it added up being like 13 employees that were added. And I'm saying, bring that to the commission in case there's any objection. If there are changes to the organizational chart that are going to result in exceeding the spending authority.
and the cons or negatives to that are issues that arise with it, the concerns?
The only thing is I just clarified that, and I think the language that's in here now, it is consistent with this clarification, just that within the organizational structure, this position leaves, I decide I don't need it over there anymore, and I'm going to reclassify it and move it over here. So we're not talking about, we're talking about a net increase of over 200 or more. And I think we're all on the same page. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
And do it. You do that, Sam.
Yeah.
That, just to make sure we're on the same page, in that top one where it says money may not be transferred, cross out money and put no more than 10% of project
If that's the same one, you pass it down.
Maybe transferred. No more than 10% of the project cost. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, go back to C. You have anything?
I don't have any concerns.
Okay, so if we can agree with that by general consensus, there are just two more that I want to cover, and I want to go 4 to 11. If those are okay and there are no changes, we'll go to the one I wanted to add, one of the ones I wanted to add. This was in a prior, this was in a set of meeting minutes several years back. And I think it should, rather than putting things in meeting minutes that may get lost because there's been 100% turnover on the commission, well, 80% turnover on whatever that is. I think Evil was there this time. Yeah. Present to the commission for vote any administrative directives that cause significant changes to the service delivery system or increase restrictions in reporting abuse, neglect, exploitation, critical incidents, or sexual assault prior to implementation. And what I mean by this, if there's and I think generally this happens when intake was moved back to, central office and out of the counties. I think you said you were going to do it, and then I think you did it. And I just want to be clear that when those kind of things occur, that needs to be more than in the meeting minutes, that needs to be in this policy. Bring to the commission major system changes like that. Okay, the last one, no, this isn't the last one, this is the next last one. Present to the commission for vote any recommended changes to legislation prior to requesting changes from the General Assembly. And I think having the legislative committee is going to help with that, but just to make sure that their law changes, I think downtown they need to know that the governing body has looked at and has approved those changes.
And I don't have a problem with this, but in the interest of transparency, there are times that I or agency staff gets called because they're negotiating something on the floor, or that staff's about to present something in an hour. And they're like, hey, look at this. Does this cause any problems for you? Da, 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 da. And so, I mean, I will do this whenever possible. I have no problem with this. But at the same time, I need you guys to understand that the way state government works is I may get a phone call. I may get requested to come into somebody's office and somebody goes, here, look at this. Do you got any problems with this? And I need to be able to respond to it as the state director.
So, and there again, as a commissioner,
right.
The problem has been, and the example that makes me think we need to make this policy was we had an opportunity to fix the Adult Health Care Consent Act in March. We were not consulted. It was fixed in a way that made the situation worse, and I just don't think that needs to happen anymore. Okay. Any disagreement?
And as we know, the state government does not move very quickly, so anytime.
No, but the bill may be introduced. I mean, yeah, you've got all these steps and processes, absolutely.
You absolutely have time to do it.
And is it usually just tweaking things that we should already know about,
It
or is it?
depends. You know,
Something like this bill, I mean,
We will have
it depends on
time,
the development.
and those things should be brought.
they should be brought. We have time.
Yeah, we have plenty of time, and months.
I mean, do we need to put a caveat or some sort of a something in there just that says time providing or something, you know, that allows her to, or allows the agency to act if it's time sensitive and she's unable to wait for a commission meeting? Is there any need for that? I don't want to have her hands tied.
Yeah, it happens several times every legislative session like clockwork.
Yeah,
I just don't want to set people up if they don't.
Right.
But the problem is this is a good example of what just happened. If it had come back to the commission, we wouldn't have all the problems that we've had. And, you know, it takes the executive director says, I'm sorry, my commission, we have a policy, we can't do it anymore. So that's the way it is.
I mean, they they can ask you for your preliminary
Yeah, your
take
preliminary,
on
but
what they're about to introduce, but then at the next meeting, you have plenty of time. If you find about it in committee and it goes to the House and it goes to the Senate and it goes to that committee, that, you know, you're gonna have plenty of time in there. They're not gonna zoom it through in a month.
Right, it takes time.
it takes time.
So we just want
They have
input.
plenty of time to do it.
Okay.
I just
last.
don't want something like that happening again. I've gotten lots and lots of calls.
So we good?
I think so.
Okay.
The idea is that if you did have to consult with a committee or whatever, that I guess this covers that at the next commission meeting, you would say, oh, in your report, basically. The commission is.
Well, I don't think it would be in my report, it would be an agenda item for you
Yeah,
guys to have.
it would be an agenda item, and that's something we'd have to deal with.
Okay,
I mean, that's the way I interpret that.
okay. So they were doing this, here's what I advised. Okay.
Okay, last one. Be responsible for ensuring the safety, security, and welfare of the individuals served and the staff of DDSN and perform the duties to maintain their well-being during a disaster situation or when a disaster is considered imminent. Follow the agency disaster preparedness plan and remain in or return to the command area and remain in areas with non-limited communication other than communication lost by reason of the disaster the entire duration of the event. Problems?
Good.
Okay. Katie?
Hold on a second.
Okay. Okay, so we agreed by general consensus on that. The last item on the agenda is the posting and retention of video recording at DDSN commission meetings. Now, can you speak to the purpose of that one?
Yeah, I think, because this is a fairly new thing, we've only been doing this a few months, and so I think that since it is a recording of the commission meetings, and it's kind of evolved, we're being recorded right now, and so it's not just the big commission meeting. The last time we had a work session, we recorded it, and we kind of are evolving into various committees and things like that. So I think it would be prudent for the commission, which is why it's recommended as a policy and not as a directive, to have an official policy on how long the agency is going to keep these. Are we going to post them? How long are we going to post them? The fact that the written minutes, which get archived in the state archives for 100 million years and all that stuff, that is the actual official commission record. However, and so what we've proposed is this, and you guys need to either approve it, amend it. But I just think it would be prudent for the agency to have something to point to say, this is how we're handling our recording of our commission meetings.
So I'm wondering, why can the recording itself not serve as the official record?
Basically, that's not industry standard or industry practice, in the sense that you usually want some form of a written record to be it. Now, it could serve as an addendum, which is kind of what it is serving. Generally speaking, that's just not how governing bodies do their official minutes. I mean, I don't know of an answer other than that. I mean, generally speaking, there is a record of votes and actions and those types of things.
And you approve the minutes, you don't approve the video.
So
I don't know what's to approve.
I mean, as I'm saying, yeah, but, if you go by Robert's rules, you approve the minutes. The next meeting you approve the minutes, you don't go back and watch the video again and approve everything that's said there.
Video is a medium that's subject to decay, too, that the written record would.
and gosh forbid there be some technical difficulties, there's no recording that day.
So the other people also, the other agencies don't keep their videos after a certain period of time?
Quite frankly, a lot of other state agencies aren't recording their stuff. So when we reached out, we don't have a whole lot of stuff. I mean, you've got the General Assembly does their stuff, and the ETD, and ETD, can keep their stuff. And
what does the General Assembly do? What's their official record?
Sure. No, I mean, it's like in the
Yeah.
Senate, it's the Senate Journal. That's their official
Yeah,
record.
written,
It's
the written,
Yeah, I mean, it's not the video. So, and whatever the House.
Is there another hard copy of that?
I don't have one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's on the last page. And so with, the amount of space that we have to host to post it and then, recording it. And these were staff recommendations. If any of these timelines give you pause, then, we can look at changing those. So.
The recordings of DDSN commission meetings are not the official record. DDSN will post a link, video on DDSN. So there's an agency that takes the records after 3 years and makes a permanent record.
Yeah, you can send them to state archives so that they are kept forever. We keep, I think we've got 20-something years of written minutes here.
We send them after 3 years to
We,
state
we,
archives.
I think we keep them, and then at a certain point, I don't want to say wrong. I think we keep them, and then at 7 years, we send them, and they, microfiche them or whatever they do. And
Okay.
keep them forever.
Microfiche,
So,
is that still in?
yeah, it's probably digital now. But yeah, that's what we're
So they're
complying
good-
with the state
they're good with
archives
this,
policy.
yeah.
So yeah, we're complying with the state archives policy. So yeah, and the state archives doesn't really, they haven't opined on video stuff, one way or the other. They just, whatever the agency considers the official minutes is what their policies address, or the official documentation record, whatever it is what they opine on.
So we could approve videos as being the official record.
But see, videos can be doctored, and you're not,
So do
again,
minutes.
yes. Well, no, you approve them. They're written up, you approve them the next time, and then you have that on the next record of the next meeting, you have that you approve the minutes.
Mhm.
And these are on YouTube, and so that's the whole problem with, who knows what happens with them. What people can do with them on YouTube.
We don't keep an original recording, we pull it on.
We have the
YouTube.
original recording,
Original,
but
yeah.
YouTube is
Yeah.
the platform
Yeah.
we use to post it for public view. So.
Katie, Sam?
What are your concerns with this? You just want it to be longevity, just to keep forever?
No, my concern is that I don't think that, sometimes I'll look at the meeting minutes and I wonder if I was at the same meeting. So, it's just selective in what we put in and what we don't. And I think there's nothing more accurate than an original video recording of what happened. How can you, based on different than somebody's interpretation of what happened. But I don't think necessarily that the state office archives is up to date with video recording and able to maintain necessarily successfully. So we might revisit this later. It'd be a beginning.
Yeah, I think this is one where it's quite appropriate to say, let's put it down this way and then
Look at it
look
again.
at it again in the future,
Hopefully that'll be somebody else's problem.
Well, and the way technology changes, who knows what's gonna happen in 6 months?
Yeah, and I think
That's
the
right.
first draft of this, and he made references to, and are posted on YouTube, and I went back and I said, no, the platforms change, we need to talk. The details that happens behind the curtain doesn't need to be in here because technology changes. This needs to talk about what we're doing. So.
Right.
So we're good with accepting this by general?
I'm good with that. Just evidentiary rules, technically, like video recordings are considered hearsay and stuff because it's not, so like she said,
Approved.
approved minutes are more reliable.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we will stand adjourned and go to our next fun show.
Okay.
Okay. Vicki,